Hi everyone, welcome back to another video. So in the last video we went through your first program. So up until now we've just been going through that program, dealing with the status LED, turning it green, turning it red, getting it to flash, and we've managed to do that now in a very controlled manner using for loops and using the sleep processor function, right? So now that we've done that, let's add to it a bit more. So we take a look at the Asuro manual on page 60, the next bit of code. It's got this code here, which is using the pulse switch function. Now, I'm not a big fan of how they've introduced this to the reader. When I first started reading it, I was very confused. The logic of this code is sound, but the code itself doesn't actually work. It's a bit annoying. We'll go through that now. Go into our code, and what we'll do is we'll write code on page 60, right, and then we'll put pulse switch. So let's make a comment, and we'll just copy and paste the code in here. One thing to note is that you see these commas here when you copy and paste in the code from the book. You want to make sure that you're changing those commas. Leave that code there as the original code. Now let's just fix this code up here. Also change those apostrophe marks. And so now this code is basically a one while loop, right? So the program's going to keep on running. And then what it's saying here is that if pulse switch is greater than 0, status LED red. If pulse switch is not greater than 0, then green. And there's no other really explanation for that. So let's first improve on this code. Firstly, one thing that's obviously missing is the init part. There's no initialization of the microprocessor. If you copy and pasted this code in and just expected it to work, it wouldn't work. So why on earth they've put it here with like the whole hashtag include? I don't know, it's beyond me. But if you remember here from our program, you've got the init here which initializes the microcontroller ports. That, for whatever reason, just isn't there. So we've got to make sure we put that there. Once we've done that, firstly, every single program should end with return 0, which basically tells the program to end. Then this code as it is now will work, and if you run it, flash it on your Asuro and test it, you'll see that as you press the pulse switches on the front, the status LED will go from green to red backwards and forwards. So let's just explain what this code is doing. Here, this pulse switch function, you're calling, this is a function. So what you're doing is we're calling pulse switch function, right? And where are we calling it from? Remember, we're calling it from here. We're calling it from 0.h. Pulse switch function exists inside 0.h, the header file. We're calling that, what we're doing is the pulse switch function, it actually, what it does is it queries, bloody hell, I can't type today. Oh, yeah, there you go. Queries the front buttons, or the front, the front switches, right, via polling, right? So what it'll do is it'll go to the front switches and say, are you pressed or not? Are you pressed or not? If it's not pressed, then that means that it's like got an open circuit, and so it has a value of 0, right? So value of 0 means that not pressed, right? But if it is pressed, then what does it have? A value of 1, right? Now the pulse switches, they do actually have different values depending on which one you press, and you can actually determine which pulse switch is being pressed, but I'm not going to go into that in this video. But just know that each pulse switch has a different value so that you can determine which one is pressed. However, as long as one of them is pressed, they all have a value greater than 0. One of them has 1, 2, 4, etc. So as long as we're reading a value of greater than 1 from those pulse switches, then we know that at least one of them has been pressed. So if we want to say that, okay, the Azuro's had a collision, one of the pulse switches has been pressed, then all we have to do is we just have to test, does the value of these switches on the front, is it greater than 0? If it's greater than 0, then we know that there's been a collision. If there's been a collision, we send the status LED red. If there hasn't been a collision, right, so value of pulse switches is 0, right? If the value of the pulse switches is 0, then we know that everything's fine and the 0 can just go green. Or we can put in code here, for example, to drive forward, right? And then what we could do is we could put in code here to say stop, right? So this is super simple code, but it's just very, very important that you understand this, because if you're going to get any sort of challenge or task by your professor or anybody to use the pulse switches, then you're definitely going to need this. And just if you're going to program the Asuro in general, you've got those switches on the front. You can use them for so many different things. I use my switches to create a menu system. So I basically said, if one of the pulse switches is pressed, then do this, or do this, or do this, etc. So this is very, very valuable code, and I would highly recommend flash this to your Asuro and mess about with it, tweak it, see if you can do some other stuff with it. Alright, I'll see you in the next one. Next video will be improving on this bit of code here, and hopefully we'll start getting Asuro to drive around as well. Alright, I'll see you in the next one. Peace.